Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar, The Rise of the Infrastructure Developer. So before we start, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So you'll notice that we've put all participants on mute. We'd like you to stay on mute throughout the webinar if you can, please. If you do have questions, you can open up the question panel on the right-hand side, type those in, and there's going to be plenty of time at the end to get through as many of those as we can. You'll also notice that we're recording the webinar as well. After the webinar is finished, we'll put that online and send you all the links so you can watch that back or share that around with colleagues that can't make it today. So in today's 15-minute webinar, it's going to be hosted by our CTO, Steve Miller. He's going to talk with you about the IT operator's role in an agile DevOps world. And we think this role is really important, as over the last few years, most of the business world has set out on the journey to move to an agile DevOps model. And most businesses are doing that for a number of reasons, really. They understand actually agile DevOps will let them be more customer focused than ever before, much more agile in their product development, and really get them at the competitive edge that they need to compete with other businesses in their sectors. And it's really because of this move into agile DevOps that developers are now often seen as kind of modern day rock stars within businesses. You know, business leaders believe that these people are the ones that will make the difference between success and failure. While this is true, at Predatar, we believe that the often forgot about IT operator has just an equally important role as these developers in the new world. You know, in short, we think the IT operator is the unsung superhero. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's coming live from his back bedroom today, and he's going to explore with you how modern technology can help the IT operator unlock their superpowers. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you everybody for signing into this session today. As Rick said, I'm the CTO of Predatar. Just to set expectations, this is about a 15-minute presentation. And as Rick said, if you've got any questions, send them via the chat window and we'll try and look at them towards the end of the session. Now, I think most of you probably know, if you're on this call, that Predatar is a software application that over the past few years has been enabling remote management and remote monitoring of Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus environments. And as our organisation has moved internally towards a more responsive way of working, which Rick has already touched on, we've experienced challenges that we think are universal. So this brief presentation is intended to basically cover some of those difficulties that we have seen from that perspective of infrastructure management. And in typical style, I'm going to start with a metaphor. So as you can probably tell, this is a representation of the human body, and as the numbers say, the brain occupies around 3% of the mass of that human body. However, the brain is quite a power-intensive beast, and it uses 20% of the resources of that body to keep going. Basically, your brain is a CPU hog. And if those resources drop, either because the body is doing something else as well, so the person is multitasking, or the person is tired, then what happens? Well, the brain gets overloaded and you get a big old headache. And how is this applicable to the role, you might say, of infrastructure specialist? Well, I've got some numbers that we're going to walk through first of all. So this is where we are today, or more accurately, this is where we were at the end of 2019. Market analysis suggests that there's over 100 million virtual machines in use across the world. So that's across all virtual platforms. So that's vSphere, Hyper-V, KVM, etc. But it's still a massive number, which I think is difficult to virtualize. If you look at that representation there, we've probably got about 20. But that's not where we're going to go. So market analysis suggests that by 2023, there's going to be 1 billion containers. There's going to be 1 billion containers within the next 3 years. So that is a massive scale up. Now, a lot of those containers will obviously be for development workloads. A lot of those containers will be transient ones that are just basically helping applications scale up and scale down or perform in place upgrades. But then again, a lot of those containers will be critical ones that are helping to serve applications or data to customers, and people need to ensure that they're resilient. And it's not just about containers. As we all know, data growth is a massive issue. IBM have predicted that there will be a tenfold increase of data in the decade between 2016 and 2025. And as that data growth speeds up, it becomes more and more important to protect that data, just at the same time as it becomes more difficult to protect that data purely because of how much of it there is. And we're not just talking about scale. So we're talking about an increase in scale of the number of machines, an increase in scale of the amount of data, but we're also talking about an increase in complexity. As people move to hybrid cloud, we end up with different layers of virtualization. So organizations might be using vSphere, they might be using Hyper-V, they might be using EC2 instances in Amazon, for instance. They might be using loads and loads of different applications. So you might be using SQL databases on-premise or NoSQL databases in the cloud. A few years ago, organizations would have an on-site presence with some infrastructure in the cloud, but often on a platform that replicated what they had on-premise. But now, instead of being expected to support a few technologies, infrastructure teams are having to support all of them. So moving to hybrid can make things more complicated for an infrastructure team. So complexity is going up. And again, as we all know, continued efficiency drives in organizations. Cost savings demands mean that teams have gotten smaller, budgets have shrunk. So infrastructure teams are being asked to support and manage more complicated environments, but probably with fewer resources. And as we've moved to these new hybrid environments with, as Rick said, agile development, continuous release cycles, the developer has become more and more important. So a developer might want resource available to provision a new node or a new application, and to that developer, that's going to be the most important thing that they're working on at that minute. That resource needs to be made available as quickly as possible. But to the infrastructure specialist who's keeping that entire environment healthy, juggling half a dozen similar requests from other lines of business, how are they going to know which is the most important requests and which ones they should prioritize? In this environment, it's most important that the infrastructure is reliable, that the infrastructure team can keep on top of that environment, and that the tools are available to help themselves, to enable developers to help themselves. Otherwise, requests will pile up, and we'll get back to where we started. The developers and the infrastructure teams will end up with another one of those headaches. So, how do we solve this? What is the way that we solve this problem of higher complexity, more scale, more complicated environments? Well, you won't be surprised to learn that the answer is through automation and orchestration. Put simply, if an organization is able to automate the workflow for provisioning applications, for configuring environments, that will take a lot of work away from the infrastructure management team. It will give developers the opportunity to use self-service to support themselves. Everybody's happy. Your developers are happy. Your infrastructure management team are happy. And critical to this is the use of APIs. So it's now commonplace for applications to allow interactions via API calls. It's how you provision workload, for example, in a Kubernetes environment. It's how Predatar interacts with IBM's backup products. I think it's fair to say that you should expect support for REST APIs when you're looking at new enterprise software products. APIs allow you to authenticate with those products, to get information from those products, and to send instructions to them without you having to do any of the work manually. They're a fundamental component of making an infrastructure easier to manage. As organizations move towards this sort of infrastructure, they need tools to help them work with those APIs and create processes that help them manage environments. So we've got tools like Ansible from Red Hat, which lets you build workflows and automation around software provisioning and application deployment, and Puppet, which is a DevOps management tool for managing and deploying apps across an entire infrastructure. And of course, Predatar can help when it comes towards protecting those Kubernetes-based environments. So as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the workflow within containers will be transient. Those containers will scale up and scale down as the application demands it, but there will still be a requirement to protect some of the data within those environments. IBM has been working on protecting that data using their products, and we've been using our API hooks into those products to help us give an example of how we'll do that. So we've got a quick demo. It's a proof of concept that we're still developing, but it's on our GA roadmap this year. And we thought you might appreciate early sight of it. So bear with me a minute, because obviously it's a demo, so it might be a bit temperamental. So, okay, so for those of you who have seen Predatar before, this is the Predatar dashboard. If you haven't seen Predatar before, then this is, well, it's the home page, it's the Predatar dashboard. This area shows you the health of your backup environment at the minute, and these options are all the standard options that are there to help organizations manage or monitor their backup environments. But new to this is the deploy option. So this is in our proof of concept piece. So deploy gives us various options, each of which use some pre-configured parameters that let Predatar reach outside the application and send an instruction to an external environment. I will select the option to deploy container to prod, which is this one. And as you can see, it's going to, basically, it's all pre-built. It's going to interact with our Kubernetes environment to provision a container and then send a command to kubectl to protect that container. So this is very much a first attempt at getting these components to work together. But it's sort of our direction of travel for Predatar for the rest of this year. So we're going to work with the various components that are available with IBM to support container-based environments and to help automate and configure protection for those container-based environments. There's going to be more demands for protecting the data within those environments, and our colleagues within IBM, we're going to work with them to ensure that Predatar is the platform of choice for supporting that. So to summarize, data growth is phenomenal. Environments are becoming more complex. Infrastructure teams are always having to fight for the demands of more work and fewer resources. And users are more demanding, looking for self-service, looking for immediate responses. So in this situation, automation is king. And the way to become an infrastructure superhero is to arm yourselves with the tools that allow that orchestration to work for you and that let you keep the lights on. So that's basically the end of the presentation. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's attended. If you want to get in touch with me afterwards, these are my contact details. You can find me on Twitter. My username is Steve Miller TSM, or you can drop me an email to steve@predatar.com. And that's pretty much it. Barbara, have we had any questions during the presentation?
Hi. Just a couple, really. So I start reading. So do you think there will be a standard platform for management of Kubernetes containers? And are there any platforms that Predatar is working with? And then there's another one. Yeah, but
well, let's try that one. So
sure.
Platforms for management of containers. Obviously working closely with IBM. IBM have, as part of their Red Hat acquisition, OpenShift Container Platform, which is a pretty comprehensive management environment for provisioning and managing container environments. So I think that's probably one of the ones that we're looking at most closely at Predatar. Obviously, vSphere announced vSphere 7, which is going to be generally available, I think, later this year. And that has quite a lot of link up, I think, between the basic vSphere package that's already there and containers. So, for instance, it's going to link up quite closely with NSX. So I think that's probably one to watch. And you'd be a fool to write off Microsoft. So I know Microsoft isn't quite as mature in this area as the others, but I think those are probably where I would be keeping an eye out. But from a Predatar point of view, we're looking at working closely with IBM and OpenShift. Yeah, so there was another question.
Yeah, there was, yeah. Do you need to back up all containers? And what about the Kubernetes cluster?
Okay, so no, you don't need to back up all containers. I think this is a concept that everyone needs to sort of fundamentally get to grips with, is that obviously a lot of those containers are transient and they'll just spin up to do a particular job and then spin down again when they're not needed. But there's going to be data within those containers that is critical. I think there's persistent, IBM are looking at protecting the persistent storage that is attached to various containers. That's basically where the value is in data protection in a container environment. So that's what we're looking at immediately. I mean, I think from a configuration point of view, there's a kubectl file, which is basically controls all the configuration information for the Kubernetes cluster. And I think protecting that is sort of like the gold dust at the center of the Kubernetes environment. So I think people are going to have to look at protecting that. And there's various products that you can use at the minute to do that. Anything else?
Nope.
No? Okay. All right. Well, like I said, thank you for taking the time to sign in this morning and listen to the webinar. If you do want to get in touch like I said, those are my contact details, and I'll get back to you. And if anyone does want a more detailed run through of Predator, then get in touch and we can organise that. As well as my contact details, if you want to keep in touch with the company, you can follow the Predator page on LinkedIn, and Predator also has a Twitter account, which is @Predator UK. And that's it really. I'd like to say thank you for attending, and hopefully speak to you soon.